Hi, welcome to Growing Concern. I want to remind folks that we're on every other week, so the next show I think is the second, something like that. Haven't got that one nailed down yet, but I got some time. Tonight we're going to talk about public banking. Yeah, I know, don't let your eyes glaze over yet, because this is going to be really interesting. Portland has been, there's some folks trying to get a public banking here in Portland. It's been tried at state level for a while, the Working Families Party a while back. And there's a lot of good reasons for it. And folks that saw my post on Facebook, I put a little excerpt from a website there to tell you what it's all about. And we're going to go into this pretty depth, and we're going to have a little extra time to talk about other things as well. But we have David Delk on my far right. Y'all folks probably know David's got his own show on I don't know when it plays, but you tape on Sundays.
Yeah, we tape on Sundays, and I don't remember when it shows either, but it shows 3 times here in the Portland area and 5 times out in Washington County. And then I've got a national distribution system going, so
right.
we're coast to coast, but with a big gap in the middle of the continent.
Big gap. Well, they wouldn't watch it anyway, probably.
Well, we do have one station in Wisconsin that watches. So
really?
Yeah.
Well, Wisconsin with Madison and all that's a very, very progressive place.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the name is Populous Dialogue still, I believe.
Yes.
Right, and it's a great program, and I'm sure you've talked about this on your program a lot.
No, we haven't talked about this because up to this point I would be interviewing myself, and that's difficult.
Oh, because now you've got this other guest here,
yes,
Gib McCullough, who's with the Portland Public Banking Alliance. And just a heads up, the Portland Public Banking Alliance is on Facebook, and it's got a page on the Alliance for Democracy, which I failed to mention what David's from. David's been spearheading a lot of issues through the Alliance for Democracy here in Portland for many years. And you're in, what's the word, indefatigable? You don't get tired, it seems like. Keep going.
Yeah.
And Gib McCullough, well, folks might know David, and I thought we'd talk a little bit to Gib about what brought him into this. Like I say every week, there's a lot to get involved in, and what brought you to this particular issue? You were mentioning Tom Hartman before the show, and
yeah, we did some work with in the Unitarian Church. We were Tom Hartman was going to come out and sell his book, The Crisis of 2016, which was about money.
And it's still going, probably.
Oh, yeah, sure. And that was a very interesting book, and we got a good response to that. And so I've always been very impressed with Tom Hartman. So I was listening to his program. He was in Portland for a while, and he was interviewing Ellen Brown. And so for some reason, Ellen Brown spent a good part of her life studying banking. And so she wrote a book, Web of Debt. And so after I heard that interview, she was talking about the impacts it would have even on a national level. But of course, it's hard to turn the bankers around. They pretty much have a pretty good hold on everything.
They had a hold on Obama.
Sure, yeah, you're right, exactly. Yeah, we found out that as soon as he was, as soon as he appointed Geithner and Summers, we thought, whoa, dude, that's not right. That's not what we expected.
No, that's not what you led us to believe.
Right, so that interview with Ellen Brown was really, I just couldn't believe what she was saying. So I got that book, I read that book, and that was years ago, but it just makes so much sense. It's, if the public understood it, then I don't believe anybody could stop it, because there isn't anybody in this city or anywhere that doesn't need money. We're not all wealthy. Mm-hmm. The inequality's huge, and we're all struggling, right? So money is a cure to almost any issue that you have.
Unless you're living in a barter economy.
Yeah, you could probably pay off Union Oil if you gave them $4 trillion. And, oh, okay, sure. Yeah, we'll just back out of that.
We believe in climate change.
That's good. Yeah. So it really does come down to money, and that's what she's talking about. And so the public bank is what it's kind of devolved into, because the public bank, we can do that. The state banks, there's some maybe legal issues, but in a municipal bank, we can start a municipal bank and use the leverage that bankers found. If you read The Web of Debt, it's just really a fascinating book. She her metaphor is the Wizard of Oz, and she wrote the. It just is. She just did such a great job of that.
Well, I looked her up one time on the internet, and I don't know if she's given a talk on that particular book.
Right.
Imagine she has. There's a number of clips
Right.
of her speaking.
Yeah, if you go to ellenbrown.com, then that'll be the Web of Debt blog
Oh,
that she
okay.
has. And there's 5 or 6 or 7 videos. There's videos that you can watch that are really instructive.
Sure,
And
and
really instructive.
And of course, when she was here a number of years ago, I
the
interviewed.
buck stops here or something.
Yeah, I interviewed her on Populist Dialogue. So there's a half-hour interview on the populistdialogues.org website.
I think her
Right,
book
yeah.
then was or at least the name of the appearance was Buck stops here.
It
starts
does
here.
sound something like that,
Yeah,
but
and
you
it
know,
was-
that was long ago, and I don't remember.
It was like
those
a
things.
40-minute talk, and boy, you know, I can't remember a thing of it now, but it made so much sense about how the economics of the country, you know, I guess the world actually, or how they all operate.
Yeah.
And and that brings us up to the point was the way that they operate is not conducive to the states or the municipalities. It's not in their favor. And that's exactly why you're wanting to do this.
Yeah, because clearly private banks are in it for making their money for themselves, and they do that by doing banking functions for cities and states and counties and so forth. But when they do that, they're taking some of that money and spreading it elsewhere, not locally. So our question is, could we do that better ourselves and aid our local economy by doing so? And the answer is yes. We can do those functions, and we can aid our economy, and we can ensure that the money that we have actually advances objectives that we here at the local level want to advance. So for instance, we have affordable housing crisis. A public bank could, I'm not saying it would, but it could dedicate itself to addressing that crisis. It could look at how we use the money that we already have to address green energy for retrofitting houses and so forth. It could look at student loan debt. And most clearly, it would partner with local financial institutions like community banks and credit unions to do the loans that they're already doing and aiding the local economy while they're doing it. But otherwise, you know, when we deal with Wall Street, they take their portion out, and it's a big portion. It's not a small portion.
And invest it somewhere else.
And invest it somewhere else. One of the graphics that I gave you is Portland's bond debt to Wall Street. I don't know if we can bring that up
All
or
right,
not.
well, Tom gets on the stick in there. He's got a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah,
Oh boy, he's quick.
Yeah,
we
there
go.
it is. Very good. Yeah, so this is from the 2016 Portland Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. So this is a financial document that Portland and actually every city does one of these, or every major city does one
Right.
of these. And this report for last year, which is the most current, showed that Portland's bond debt was almost $3.4 billion. That's how much we owe just for bonds. And that last year we made a principal payment of 107, almost 108 million dollars. So really a really small amount. You know, comparing 3.4 billion
Sure.
to 108 million, it's really small. But we also, in addition to paying for the principal, we also paid interest of almost 44 million, and then we had debt issuance fees in general, $460,000. So we paid an extra 41% last year on the debt. That is money, if we had our own bank, that we could be using ourselves in the local economy instead of sending it to Wall Street, who knows where they might invest it or what they might do with it. Okay.
So what you're saying is that number, that 3.5 billion roughly, is money we borrowed from Wall Street?
Yes.
Bonds.
Right. Yeah.
Bonds.
Issue
Bonds.
bond-
I'm pretty much zero
Yeah.
knowledge about this stuff.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
they issue bonds. We just voted on a bond, right? For
A big
school
one,
district.
yeah.
A big
Yeah.
one, you bet.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that school district one would not be reflected in this figures that we were just, but both because we haven't spent it yet,
Right.
and also because the school district is separate from the city.
Right.
But this is a good example. If we had our own public bank in Portland, that public bank would be able to loan the city or loan the school district that money that they're going to Wall Street to get, and we would still have to pay for it, but we wouldn't have to pay for all that interest. We'd pay a much smaller interest rate, and the interest that we paid would be going back to ourselves, to our own bank, instead of to Wall Street.
Sure. Well, like I said, I don't know a lot about this, but I do know a few things about it. But I'm going to give the question here: why doesn't everybody do it?
You know what?
That's the first thing that
yeah.
come to most people's minds.
Yeah, the Public Bank Institute is something Ellen Brown started back east, and so there's Walt McCree is one of their public relations guy. He came out and talked. I went to listen to that here in Portland at the Unitarian Church, and one of the young women, came up to speak and ask questions. She says, "This is a no-brainer. Why isn't
Exactly.
Krugman talking about this?" You know, I mean,
Yeah.
so
very much.
where is everybody on this, and why is this not in place? It makes no sense that if these bond debts, you have to have lawyers, you have underwriters, which are stock market brokers that purchase the bond from you and then sell it back to people on the market. I mean, you have no control of that.
You mean the money that you might owe the bank for say this 290 million or whatever we just passed the
Yeah.
bond? We borrow that money from the bank, and then they can sell that debt to someone else.
Yeah. Well, that's how bonding takes place. They have underwriters, and you're going as an issuer. You're just going to sell the bonds to the underwriter. He's the one he's a broker essentially. He has to market the bond on this on the stock market.
Isn't that what happened
The
with
bonds,
the housing
right?
crisis
So
a
if
while
you want to
back?
go out and buy a bond, you buy a municipal bond. It's tax free. People want to do that.
Sure.
So that's the institutional way that you get money as a municipality, and the bonding debt is substantial, and the fees are large. And if you take money that the Portland City would have, not every account they have always has an ending balance at the end of the year, and so that's money that usually will end up in investments. But if you don't invest it, if you just give it to the Portland bank, if they had their own bank, then you have the leverage that bankers use. So maybe you deposit that's $1 billion, then you get because you only have to have 10% reserve, that could be $10 billion. Okay, you can use that money to invest, to loan to the city of Portland, and it pays interest on it back into the bank that's their bank. Mm-hmm. It's recycling. It's recycling money. That's
a good way to put it.
it's just silly that's not in place. There's no excuse for that. So
Well, the reason why it's not in place is because of the power of the bigger banks.
I don't know what the
yeah.
connection with the city, a municipality like Portland. That's we're not in the headlines a lot.
Mm-hmm. David,
I was.
You were
and
gonna-
it went out of my mind.
you went out of your mind.
Well, I guess one thing I would say is that public banking is pretty new to the United States. We haven't really considered it very much, although we do have this one really great example of a public bank
North
that's
Dakota,
existed for
yeah.
almost 100 years now, the Bank of North Dakota. But worldwide, 40% of the worldwide banking is done through public banking.
Through local.
Through local banks, regional
State.
banks, state banks. In Germany, they have, I've forgotten what they're called. But they,
Sparkassen or something
yes,
like that.
something like that.
Mhm.
And these are like city banks, these are retail banks where you and I would be able to bank at. And what they had found a couple hundred years ago is that the national banks in Germany weren't servicing ordinary citizens, and so they decided they would form their own banks, and so they did. So each town has got their own bank. Those banks form regional networks, and then they have a national network of these banks, and then there are other types of public banks in Germany as well. Ellen Brown just wrote an article on her blog, and let me see, if China can fund infrastructure with its own credit, so can we. Talking about how China has built a massive 12,000 miles of high-speed rail in just one decade. A huge, huge project.
We can't even get it off the ground.
We can't think of how we can do these things just in the Portland area, let alone nationally. And they do it there because the bank provides the credit, the bank provides the money.
It's a public bank.
And they create the money.
To China, the BRIC countries have public banks. For their countries, their national banks are public.
It's Japan.
It's not private. Japan, yes.
Well, it seems like I know that they've been trying to get something in California, I forget, between San Francisco and LA, and they just keep getting roadblocks. And I wonder if some of them roadblocks are actually coming from the banks.
Oh, most clearly.
Yeah.
Most clearly they do. They this is to their disadvantage. They'll make no money off of it. That's kind of the way capitalism works.
Yeah, like, they not spending much research on the antibiotics because people just take them for a few days, but they want these ones that they can make thousands and thousands of dollars over a person's lifetime.
Right.
That's just another example of it. I was just talking about that with somebody today that this corporate profit before people is it isn't just with Monsanto and the things that we've talked about, but the banking's the same thing. They have a large reach, it would seem to me, and they don't in Europe. I'm happy to hear that. I didn't know that.
Well, some parts of it. The Bank of England is, that's a huge private worldwide bank. They don't like, private bankers don't like public banking. And Canada was a public bank. Nationally, they had a public bank for years. I don't know how, but till recently, I mean, maybe in the 70s or 80s, I'm not quite sure, did the Bank of England made a call. And they said, you know what, if you need to be part of our club.
The Queen says so.
Well, no, yeah, well, I'm sure the Queen.
Facetiously.
Yeah. So then there's no longer a public bank in Canada. And that's just such a huge change in their capabilities to finance. Just as you wonder what's going on here.
It's really hard to change, it seems like. But they changed in our mind for the worst, but they were able to make a change on a system that's been going on for a long time.
Right. Well, they went private. Really, public beats private every time.
I know we tried a few
No
years
profit.
ago to get public electricity here, and somehow the PGE came out with all their scare tactics, just like they did for genetic engineered foods and all these different things people try to do. But they always talk about it. They, meaning the opposition, always say that it's going to cost you money, and actually it's the other way around.
Yeah, and particularly when we're talking about banking, it is so clear from that chart that I showed. Almost $44 million was paid to Wall Street in interest. That is money coming right out. Yeah, that is money coming right out of your pocket.
Mm-hmm. What does that
and-
41% mean?
Well,
Exactly.
that's the 44.6 plus the 560 K equals 44.2 million, and that is 41% of the principal.
Of the principal.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
And
So
that
that's
principal,
41%.
that's what's due every year?
That is what we pay. It's the same as when you buy a house, and you make your payment every month, and a certain amount of that payment goes down to pay down the principal.
Or even your
and
credit card.
The other part, well, yes, right, and the other goes to the interest, and so that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And-
And a public bank doesn't mean you don't pay some interest, but you don't pay 41%.
But you
And
pay
you
it back
pay
to
it
yourself. You're paying the
Just
interest
what
back
I was
to
gonna,
yourself.
ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You pay
So
it
you're
back
paying
to
it back to
yourself.
yourself,
That's
and that
crazy.
interest goes on top of what you already have,
Yeah.
rather
Yes,
than what
right.
you owe.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Right.
That's like, so why aren't we doing this?
That was my question a while back, and it's
It's inexplicable.
I think that North Dakota maybe was always doing it.
Oh, they did, yeah.
Well, they didn't always do it. There was a specific crisis in North Dakota that got the people riled up there in a populist moment, and they said, well, the banks, the East banks, which were actually not very far east, but they were east of North Dakota, are not servicing us. They are not providing credit, and so we need to do it for ourselves. And so they set up a bank, and it's been running for 400 years, almost 100 years.
And it ran really well through the 2008 meltdown, from what I understand. They didn't suffer at all.
No, it had almost no increase in the unemployment. The other financial, problems that the rest of the nation encountered did not happen in North Dakota. And a lot of people said, well, that was because of all the oil. But with the pricing of oil going down, North Dakota is still experiencing the same growth that they had before the decrease in the oil price
And the
itself.
fracking and everything going away.
Yeah. So it's clearly a function of the having the public bank and having your banking system working for you instead of working for Wall Street. And of course, this is why, talk about 2007, 2008, and the financial crisis, the Great Recession. This is really where the increase in the interest of public banking really accelerated, because it was like, wow, do we really want to continue doing business with these banks that have done this to us? What are the institutions that we can create that support us, instead of supporting Wall Street? And one of those, clearly we could take our money out of Wall Street banks individually, and we could put it into a credit union or community bank. But that only goes so far, because we have got this big pot of money. It's called the City of Portland, and we can take that and invest it in ourselves by creating our own bank.
Sure. Well, I'm gonna give. If we have this money and we put it into the East Coast banks or whatever, it's not really working for us as much as it could if we put it in our own bank.
Well,
Do I see that right?
Well, there's a treasury pool, an investment pool that the city of Portland has, and it's about $1.5 billion of capital that they have. At the end of the day, they invest in securities. They buy federal securities, and they buy corporate securities, money market stuff. So that's $1 billion that you could just go into the bank. So if you took that $1 billion and you put it in the bank, then because you only need 10% as a reserve, that you never really lend your deposits, you just make a credit on the books.
Ah, okay.
So you have so much capital that you can use for affordable housing. You could get together with local developers. They have to worry about private equity people. That's how they get their money, and they don't. There's some really There's a developer in this town that's very popular, and the CEO is from Harvard, and one of the young women that works for him is MIT, and there's a really high-end developing group. They will not get money from institutional investors. And the interest rates are extreme, and the institutional investors will try to control their product, and they don't like that. So you could provide, from a public bank, could provide the money to them at maybe a fourth of what a private equity company, because if you don't want to deal with a private equity company, they'll say, we'll just move on to Southern California. I know that they're gonna, there's going to be a demand down there. If Portland can't pay 8 or 10% in private equity, we'll just move it down there. And so then the squeeze is the money. The squeeze is always the money. And if the public bank has the capital, I just don't understand why that's not gonna
fly.
Why that's not gonna work.
Yeah. Well, David, it occurs to me that in today's age, when so much infrastructure and different things are a problem, would that help, or would that have to be, say, a state bank in a state bank rather than a municipal bank?
Well,
we do have local. I mean, just drive down the road, look at the roads. I mean,
yeah. So
could it help the people like that?
The ideal situation would be that we would have a municipal bank here. There would be a municipal bank in Salem, a municipal bank in Eugene, and so you'd have this network of bringing the money back locally in each of those communities, and you'd have a state public bank like we tried to work on immediately following the Great Recession, which we weren't successful, of course.
I understand there's a law against a state bank right now.
Well, there's some language in the Oregon Constitution. If it was a law, it would be much easier to change it. But there's some language in the state constitution which has been interpreted to suggest that we can't have a state bank. But it clearly does not say anything about a municipal bank. So there's nothing in the Constitution, in the Oregon Constitution, that says you can't have a municipal bank. If we're successful at having a municipal bank in Portland, if we could get one in a couple other locations,
pushing them in
then
that direction.
we would have the impetus to change the Constitution and have a state bank if we actually needed to. There's various opinions about what the Constitution says and how you interpret it. One interpretation is that the Constitution says that we won't coin money, and that's what was being talked about.
Okay.
Not that you couldn't have a bank. And there's we're not getting into all those details. There's question marks, and we can argue that case.
But ultimately, it would be up to a judge to make that decision, wouldn't it?
It could be. It could be that we do something and do an initiative and change the Constitution. That would be difficult to do at this point in time. But if we had a functioning bank in Portland to demonstrate what it can do, then you could easily talk about that statewide, and people could understand it and understand what the advantages would be for changing the Constitution, so we could have a state bank as well.
Sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And if the bank, if Wall Street banks have power to make demands, local banks would too, I would think, and they would be able to hooking up to an idea I was thinking of earlier, and you've already mentioned it. You could loan money for housing. You could loan money for maybe people who are trying to help the homeless, and that would seem that the power to do good would be just augmented.
The power to do good would be augmented is an excellent statement. Yes, for sure, right? Yeah, and I did reference that municipal banks would work, and not at the very beginning. The first function of a municipal bank would be make sure that it's on a sound financial basis itself. And after it does that, then it would be in a position to start loaning money, and rather than having a staff of bankers that would
Cold-blooded
qualify.
bankers.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that would qualify the loans and so forth. A municipal bank would partner with those institutions that already do that. So credit unions and community banks.
That'd be great.
Both of which act locally, and so some of those loans that they would say yes to, they don't have the resources to actually make the loans entirely on themselves. And so a community municipal bank would be able to partner with those institutions. So this is really important, because what we want to do is present a scenario in which they benefit from having a community bank, because we need to drive that wedge between those community banks and Wall Street.
You know, we've talked about the fact that we could do a lot of good, and I'm wondering that the what we've talked about was, you know, affordable housing and homelessness, but wouldn't it be also that local businesses could be getting business loans as well? It wouldn't be just for social policy.
Right. The Bank of North Dakota has about $4 billion in loans, you know, and they have their assets are around $8 billion, and those are student loans. They're
That's a big one.
yeah, they're business loans, small business loans, and they do a lot of their loans are purchased from the community bank, so that if the community bank is short on capital, they can sell those loans to the Bank of North Dakota, and then they're not as strapped, and they can offer more loans to. Typically, the public bank is the retail end of the public bank will be the community banks, and
I see that.
they can have letters. They offer letters of credit for banks, so that banks they're supported and backed up by the full faith and credit of the city of Portland, and then the risk goes away. And there's nothing about this that is marginal.
It's true.
Yeah.
You know, the whole time we've been talking, we say, well, we get the money from Wall Street,
Sir.
but we don't go to Wall Street to get it. You just do it through local banks like Bank of America, or what? Is that how that's done, or is there a specific bank in Wall Street that you have to go to get your bond money?
But that's it.
Well,
it's Wall Street. Yeah.
It is Wall Street. It isn't
it's
local
Wall
Bank
Street.
of America or Wells Fargo or whatever. Then.
Yeah, I guess I'm not quite understanding the question.
Well, where would they get the money? Who would they go to get that money?
Are
Say
you
that
saying the public
$290
bank?
million or whatever that was for this local bond.
Oh, so if the voters of Portland, you approved $290 million for a bond for affordable housing, which they did, and so if we had a community bank, instead of going to Wall Street,
So we
and
actually go
having-
to Wall Street. Then.
Currently, we go to Wall Street,
Right.
and they underwrite that bond, and then they sell it, and make their money on it, and charge us interest for doing all of that. But if we had our own municipal bank, we would say to our municipal bank, loan us the money. You loan us the money to do this. And so then instead of paying, the $290 million that we authorized plus interest, the local bank would issue the $290 and charge us a much smaller amount of interest on it. So we would actually be able to use all $290 million for affordable housing instead of having to siphon a bunch of it off to pay interest to Wall Street.
I thought that's what we were saying. And it doesn't hurt to, in issues like this, where maybe the viewers are as I won't use the word ignorant, but not as knowledgeable about this issue. It's good to go over this information sometimes more than once. And it just seems to me like, oh, there we go. That's what you were talking about right there.
Yeah, this is an excellent graphic because they're on.
Good timing, Tom.
Yeah, on my left is what happens currently with the private banking system, and you can see taxes through and bonds go to the government, which invests it in Wall Street, and then Wall Street puts it into derivatives and speculating in the stock market, and then the profits that they make go back to Wall Street. They don't come back to the city of Portland. On the public banking side, you've got citizens at the top. We could pay lower taxes to government. We make the deposits into our own public bank, which then invests that money locally, either by loaning it or by partnering with the local banks and community banks and the credit unions. And then that, because it's invested locally, creates jobs here and creates revenue streams locally instead of having that money go back to Wall Street. So that crucial connection happens with public banking. And you notice on the private banking, there is no connection there.
Not at all. Yeah, it's not a circle.
It's
it
not
all
a circle.
stops down below there.
Right there with the
Right.
dice. See
Yeah.
the dice?
Yeah.
Yeah, right there with the dice. That's
Yeah.
well done.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that really makes it.
Yeah.
You know, even though you're using most of the same words, it really makes a big difference when you can visually see that like
Yeah.
that.
Right.
That's
Right.
great. You know, you had a couple more graphics. Do they fit into anything that we're talking about here?
Well, let's see. The other one was the one about public banks. It's titled "Public Banks." It's just a
There we
yeah.
go.
There it is. Yeah. So public banks, and this is not just a municipal bank. This is in general for public banks in general.
Whether it's state or whatever.
Whatever level you create them at. So public banks make affordable loans to small businesses, farmers, other government entities. So that would be other government entities would be like the Portland School District, which is not part of the city government. They could go to a Portland municipal bank and say, loan us the money instead of going to Wall Street. And what we just approved was almost $800 million. So the fees on that are going to be horrendous. And we could be
It's usually about,
reinvesting back into
Yeah.
our own economy.
Yeah.
So, and then the students refers to the Bank of North Dakota. They actually have loan programs for students, which they offer student loans at a much lower rate than what the traditional loan providers do, and they actually buy back from students those high interest loans and then refinance them with low interest loans. So a big service. Would a Portland Municipal Bank do that? We don't know. It could. Those are kind of decisions about what a Portland Public Bank would actually do, are decisions that would need to be made as we go along. We have public discussions about what we want it to do.
Sure.
But that's one of the possibilities. So if we can bring that back up. Yeah, there it goes. So saves taxpayers up to 50% on critical infrastructure like bridges and trains. So we'd say light rail and
Please.
schools. So 50% is a big figure, and it's that part of the expense of doing these kinds of things that we never talk about, but we always have to pay it. But we could be paying it back to ourselves. Eliminate billions in bank fees, we've talked about that, and money management fees, support the local vibrant banking sector. And this refers to partnering with those community banks and credit unions. In North Dakota, right now, since the Great Recession, we have been losing credit unions and community banks, and they've just been going out of business, except in North Dakota. North Dakota has more community banks and credit unions per capita than any place else in the nation. So, and the reason for that, the reason they're so strong is the partnership they have with the state community bank. Right?
You know, one thing that jumped out at me was the word farmer up there.
Yes.
I mean, it just seems to me that if farmers had access to a little bit easier money with less interest, they could maybe get into more organics and more sustainability, and the same goes things for energy as well. I would think that would really be helpful in that, because it seems to me that I don't know exactly what these Wall Street banks are all about, but I imagine that they're really chummy with the Exxon Mobil and those type of folks, and they may not be as prone to loan money on a sustainable energy situation, whereas locally you can see right there how it would help. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I wouldn't speak directly to that, but on the banking thing, North Dakota, particularly when the Bank of North Dakota was founded, was a very agricultural state, and that was why they needed to create this alternative institution, was because the East Coast banks were not funding, they were not extending credit to the farmers of North Dakota. And so that is one thing. Now, here in Portland, we probably don't have too many farms. We have some farms, but not very much. So that would not probably be a big activity for a municipal bank. But if we had a state bank, it would be an important,
Well, wouldn't
important activity.
farmers out of Bend possibly still come to Portland and ask for business loans? How would that work? As far as, is it
Details to be worked out.
to be worked out? That, to me, that is a good question.
Yes,
And I don't know if Gib has any ideas about that.
Yeah, but basically the public banks aren't a retail bank, so maybe the community banks do the work to develop loans to small businesses or farms or wherever
Sure.
the need is, and the capital support is what the public bank can provide, and that reduces the risks. Banks are all about risk, so it makes everything sustainable and it works.
All right. Well, we've got like 17 minutes left, and we've talked a lot about the advantages of it. How about the campaign? How's the campaign to get this
the
thing
campaign
done?
to go? Well,
yeah, you've been meeting with a city, or the alliance that you are a part of, or a Portland Alliance, or Portland
Alliance for Democracy.
Alliance for Democracy. I want to go Portland Alliance, a dead newspaper.
Yeah,
but
that's
it was an important part of Portland at one time.
Yes, all right, yeah.
So I know
Yeah.
either one of you want to chime into what's going on. If
Yeah.
the city would have we'd have to convince them that this is important.
Yeah. So what we did when we first formed our organization was just a little bit over a year ago, and our first activity was really reaching out to all the candidates running for public office in Portland. So everyone running for mayor and the various city council.
Make them aware of it. then.
Yeah, made them aware of this. Asked them in public forums how they felt about it, and we got all except for one candidate making statements that they support the idea of having a public bank. And so from there, we then in the general election, Chloe Udali was running against Steve Novick, and we
An
worked.
incumbent.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. And we worked with Chloe Udali on this issue, and she and her chief campaign manager at the time
Right.
was very, very interested. And so their interest has continued, and we have continued working with them. We did, when the city council was having making their decision about how they were going to use their investment dollars for the future, 5 of us went down and we testified at that about the value of having a public bank. We got general statements of support, or at least curiosity, from all of the commissioners. And Nick Fish joined Chloe Udali in saying that he supports doing a feasibility study for a public bank in Portland. So that was a big step forward. And now we're working with Chloe Udali's office to craft a resolution for a feasibility study. So we are making progress. Really important for people who are listening to call city commissioners. Take your pick, doesn't matter which one. Call them all. Call the mayor, and tell them that you think that we should do a feasibility study for creating a public bank. So this is kind of like doing your due diligence rather than just saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to do this." Does it make financial success, financial sense for the city to create such a bank?
Such a bank.
So that's really our first step of what we need to do. We are not alone in Portland in doing this. There are efforts across the United States to
Yeah, I was
create
gonna ask
public
about
banks.
that. Yeah.
And so the Alliance for Democracy, with our people in Boston and Washington, D.C., they're moving ahead in Washington, D.C. on a municipal bank, probably dealing with infrastructure. And Boston was focused on a municipal bank. They have actually moved on to now consider a state bank rather than looking at a municipal bank at this point in time. But there are other efforts. The effort that has come furthest is in Santa Fe. They have done 2 feasibility studies, one which was a citizens feasibility study, and the second one which was a sanctioned, paid for by the city. And both of those studies came to the same kind of conclusions that within the first year, a public bank in Santa Fe could turn a profit in the first year.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and over the course of 7 years, the annual profit would be about $1 million. And Santa Fe is much smaller than Portland, so we have a much stronger financial basis for creating a bank than Santa Fe.
I'm also wondering, maybe, I don't know if Gib can talk to this, but the situation with, we can do a citywide initiative, couldn't we?
Oh, the initiative process.
Yeah.
I think David.
Is that
probably
David's?
knows
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
I should know. Yeah.
He's the guy. on
Right,
that,
yes. Yeah, so we could create this through the initiative process. It
a little
would
hairier.
probably
Yeah,
make
right.
more sense for the city to do it themselves rather than going through the initiative process. But
Right.
that is an option at some point, if the city doesn't step up to,
So I was
to
wondering
the
if that
plate.
would
But,
be.
but talking about other locations, cities that are looking at it, is Santa Fe, I mentioned, Washington, D.C., Boston, San Francisco, Seattle, Tacoma, Santa Rosa in California.
All sound left wing to me. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that's okay with me.
Me too.
Right,
I was
yeah.
just wondering that.
But it really is a nonpartisan issue. The only reason it becomes a partisan issue is that Republicans in particular like to align themselves with corporate interests. Democrats do too, particularly when you get to the national level.
Just one's in front of the other.
Yes, right, yeah. So anyway, my point being that this is an effort that is seeing a lot of energy across the United States to create these local community banks.
All right. Well, I think we've covered that pretty good, and we've got about 10 minutes left. I thought we might move on to one or two other subjects. You mentioned one that I think is really important because I haven't seen anything about it. But you have anything else to nail down on that one there? I think we pretty well covered it.
You're talking about
one to
more to
fig-
say about the public bank?
Yeah. Anything else that we have missed? I know Gib or yourself.
Well, the only thing, other thing that I would say, and this should be probably obvious from what we've been talking about, and that is that a municipal bank is not a retail bank. So that means that you and I would not go to the bank, a municipal bank, and do our banking.
Right.
We wouldn't write the checks. They would not have our checking accounts. They probably would not make loans directly to us.
To individuals. Right.
So it's not a retail bank. You're not going to see the Municipal Bank of Portland on every street corner because that's not the way it operates. Those are very expensive operations. One of the ways that a city bank makes money is by not doing that retail presence. So I just make that point.
So the retail presence for those places, for that bank, would be the community banks.
It would be the
Right.
community banks and the credit unions, which know
Yeah.
what they're doing, and the public bank would make them stronger.
Right.
I think we'd just like to mention if anybody wants to learn about this issue, that ellenbrown.com is where her blog is. And there's a lot of videos on that blog that are just excellent. And you can learn a lot. And there's podcasts. And she has a radio podcast weekly, I think. And read the book. what would that?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and there are actually 2 books that she's written on this subject. She's written about 18 books.
Prolific
she,
lady.
she likes it, very, very much so. But she's written 2 books. So the Web of Doubt is the older one, and then the newer one is called The Public Bank Solution. And I highly recommend both of them. They will really get you into the details and the nitty-gritty of.
Well, talking
of
the
this.
edge is a good way to do it, but then a book you can sit down and read it and reread it and at your
Yeah.
leisure. And
Right.
'cause some of this information it needs a while to sink in and some repetition.
That's true.
Yeah.
There's a fog about it.
Yeah, that's right. That's
A
right.
bit of a fog.
You know, so
I don't know why, but
But I want to thank the crew. They've been in there making us look good out here, and I want to thank Gib and David for coming on and
Thank
talking
you.
about these issues.
Yeah.
And we got 20 seconds left. Not much time left, but we've talked about this public banking, and we've given you some ways to look it up and do some research. You know, don't necessarily take our word for it. There's a lot of information out there. Ellen Brown's blog, and what was that? Public Banking
Public
Institute?
Banking Institute.
There's a lot of places to follow up. So we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks for tuning in.